All right. Hey, good morning. Today is, oh, where's my schedule? Here it is. Today is May 12th. We're going to get into lesson 19 today, pages 391 to 394. Today is going to be a lot on just building the conceptual understanding what we're talking about when we talk about multiplication by fraction. And so as we get into multiplying fractions, you guys are going to find eventually that there are some things that we can do that make this really easy. But the point of all this, though, is understanding what's actually happening when we do this. Multiplying fractions is not that difficult, honestly. But the big thing is going to be focused on what is actually happening when we do it. It's not just, hey, I multiply this by this and I just go through the process. Okay. It's about what's actually occurring when we do this. Okay, so visualization, modeling, things like that, so we can actually see and understand exactly what's going on. So again, I've said this many times this year. We want to get to the right answer, yes, but if we can't explain what's going on when we get to the right answer, then we're not understanding the standard, and we're not understanding the concept, which is much more important than the right answer right now. Now, eventually in time, obviously, if you're doing something, you're building something or something like that, having the exact right answer is a super important thing, right? But it's really hard to apply that if you don't understand what's going on. All right, so let's look at this. On lesson 19, it says exploring multiplication by a fraction, our learning target. As we've talked about before, you can read that, you pause it and read it. Okay? But the idea is that we're multiplying a fraction by a whole number and then eventually a fraction by a fraction, right? So, or a whole number by a fraction, but as you know, it doesn't matter. Those are interchangeable. So let's look at number one here. Okay, we'll move through these together here. And so it should be pretty straightforward. So it says shade and label 3 half-inch sections of the ruler. Then complete the sentence of the multiplication equation that represents the total length of shaded. So I'm going to use multiple colors. If you shade with a pencil, I recommend shading it like different patterns or slightly different colors or whatever. So we're going to shade 3 sections. So, or we, you don't have to shade, you can just mark it off, right? There's one section. That's a half an inch, right? Okay. Then here's another group. That's a half an inch. Okay. Right. So this is a half an inch. That's half an inch. Then the last one we'll do this beautiful pink color here. Boom. That's half an inch, right? So there's 1, 2, lastly 3, right? All right. So those are our, I'm actually gonna draw a line right here as well. Just the piece on the end doesn't count. So there's 3 sections, and each one are half an inch, right? So the idea is, how much do we total have? Well, from 0, we go out as a half inch, half inch, half inch. We just added a half plus a half plus a half. We got to 3 halves, right? Okay, we got to 3 halves, written as 3 over 2, or which is equal to 1, right? 1 and a half. Okay, pretty simple, straightforward, but a visualization of why it works. So 3 times a half is 3 halves, or 1 and a half, right? It's the same answer for both, but the idea is it's just building my understanding. So the idea is, again, half plus half plus half, but when we're adding, it's just repeated addition of the same, something of the same size. So we're just multiplying it instead of going half plus half plus half. It's just 3 of them, so we multiply and then we get 1 and a half. Okay, pretty straightforward, pretty simple. That shouldn't be anything new. We've talked about these concepts in the past. Okay, so let's look at this now. Okay, so this says shade and label shade and label half of a 3-inch section of the ruler. Then complete the sentence and the multiplication equation that represents the total length you shaded. All right. So the idea is that we want to shade half of 3. So if this is 3, right? Here's our 3 inches. So we want to do half of 3, right? Well, half of 3 is going to be 1 half, right? 1 and a half. Okay, so 1.5 is half of our 3 inches. All right, so sorry. So half of our 3 inches, where am I at here? Okay, so then complete the sentence. So the idea is that if we look at it as, if we looked at this one as 3 groups of a half, this one we're looking at as half of 3, right? So half of 3 would be 1.5. Again, the answer here is still going to be 3 halves, which is actually 1.5, right? Okay, here it's going to be basically 1.5. It's going to be the same answer, right? The point is that both of these models are doing the exact same thing. Here we looked at 3 times a half, and here we looked at a half times 3, right? So, I mean, it doesn't matter which order we look at it in, but this word right here is super important, okay? The word of is super important. Of equals multiplication, okay? Okay, so when it says you have so much X number of another number, okay, it means we're multiplying, okay? So the same thing as when it says I have 3 groups of 4. Well, 3 groups of 4, we're multiplying 3 times 4, right? Okay, it's no different here. Okay, half of 3, we're going to multiply 1/2 times 3. Okay, if it's 3 sections of 1/2, well, we're going to multiply 3 times 1/2, right? But it doesn't matter which order we multiply them in. You can always switch them if you want as well, right? So if you're looking, you're like, hey, it's easier for me to multiply the whole number from, let's switch them. Doesn't really matter when we're dealing with these basic numbers, okay? But it doesn't matter. Okay, we can do this. Okay, let's go to the next page. All right. All right, here we go. Okay, on this page it says, shade and label the ruler to find the length of 1/4 of 1/2. Ooh, now we're getting into fractions and fractions, right? But guess what? We can do this, okay? So again, it says, shade and label the ruler to find the length of 1/4 of 1/2. Well, the first thing we need to do is find 1/2, right? So here's 1/2 right here. So you should do this with me. This is 1/2, right? Okay, this is half of a whole, so this is 1/2, right? And then we want to find 1/4 of this 1/2. So we need to take this half here, and we're going to cut it into fourths, right? So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 parts, don't we? Okay, so if I shade in, we shade in this, that shaded in part is 1/4 of 1/2, right? That shaded part is 1/4 of 1/2. But what is that, right? What is that? How much is this? One jump here. What is one jump? So if we just move over here just so it doesn't get so convoluted, I'm gonna use a different color, but from this point to this point, we have one hole, right? And this one jump is the same as this one jump, isn't it? But how much is that? Is it 1/4? No, it's not 1/4. Well, it's 1/4 of a half, but it's not 1/4 of a whole. Remember, everything has got to be ultimately in relationship to a whole is when we write our final answer. Everything is, whether they're whole numbers or fractions or decimals or whatever it is, everything is in correlation to a whole number in relationship to that. That's how we've talked about this numerous times this year, right? Well, what is this? How many jumps are there here? There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's 8 parts of this whole. So therefore, one part of these 8 parts of the whole is 1/8, right? Correct? So this part right here, this blue part right here, 1/4 of a half is 1. So 1/4 of 1/2 inch is 1/8 of a whole inch, right? So it's 1/8 of 1 inch. So of this whole inch here, from here to here, right? From here to here, that's going to be 1/8. So 1/4 of a half is actually equal to 1/8 of a whole inch, and that's ultimately what I'm related to is it's 1/8, right? So therefore, 1/4 times 1/2 is 1/8. Okay, easy peasy. Yep. Okay, let's look at number 4 then. Number 4 says shade and label the ruler to show 3/4 of 1/2. All right, shade 3/4 of 1. Now we're gonna do the same thing we just talked about, right? Okay. We have 3/4 of 1/2. So we want to get 1/2. Here's my 1/2. 1/2, right? Okay, we're going to divide this into fourths again, right? Fourths. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, and there's the 4/4, right? Well, I'm going to show this in a different color here. We want 3/4, don't we? We want 3/4. So there's 1/4, 2/4, 3/4. Now that when I say fourth, I'm not talking about 3/4 as actually being 3/4. I'm saying it's 3/4 of the half, right? So if I'm just looking at this, if that was a whole, then it would be equal to 3/4 of 1, right? 3/4 of 1 would be 3/4 times 1, which would just be 3/4, right? But we're not talking about 3/4 of, we're not talking about 3/4 of 1. We're talking about 3/4 of the half, right? So the idea is we're looking at 3/4 of, I mean, we multiply, right? Remember, of equals multiplication, right? 3/4 of 1/2. Okay. Well, the question is how much of this whole thing is it, right? Okay. Well, remember up here when we talked about these were equal to 1/8, each of these are equal to an eighth. So do you think each of these are equal to an eighth too? Yeah, absolutely, right? These are still eighths, aren't they? So again, if I have 3 of them shaded, that means that's equal to 3/8. So 3/4 of a half is 3/8. Okay. All right. Okay. I'm not worried about this reflection down here. I'm not worried about that. If you're watching the video, you know you can just skip that. Okay. All right. Over here, for this vocabulary stuff here, I will give you some examples real fast here. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but that is equal parts. This should be review. Okay. Here's some quick information for this. I will focus it for you. Here you go. So you can always pause this, jot your notes in. You can write your own examples. In non-examples, these are not equal parts. These examples, these are equal parts. So just use the basic. Don't overdo this. This is actually pretty straightforward. But the important thing is that parts of a whole that have the same value, same size, or the same amount is the definition that we can use for that. But don't overdo that. We're good. Okay. All right. You can pause it. If I'm going too fast, then you can always go back and then pause it again, right? Okay. All right. Last one we're going to do here together here today. Then on page 394, there's going to be numbers 3 and 4 you'll do on your own, but we'll do number 2 here together. Okay. So number 2 says, shade and label 3 1/4 inch sections of the ruler. Complete the sentence and the multiplication equation that represents the total length that you shaded. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and shade in 3 1/4 sections. So let's identify. Let's say that from 0 to 1, there's 1, 2, 3. There's 4 parts. So it's already broken up into fourths for us. Correct? It's already broken up into fourths for us. So we're gonna shade in 3 of them. So we're gonna go 1, 2, 3, right? So this is 1, 2, 3. So I just shaded in those. That's 3/4, okay, of that, right? Be good? Yep. So 3 sections of 3/4. There's 3 sections that are 3 sections that are 1/4. I'm already giving the answer, okay, because it's not that hard, okay? It'd be 3/4, right? So 3 sections of 1/4 are 3/4. Therefore, 3 times 1/4 is 3/4. Again, this one's pretty simple. Yep. All right, I'm gonna let you finish this out, numbers 3 and 4 on your own. Okay. Tomorrow, I will try to remember to post this. If you want to check your work, obviously you can check with me. hopefully you're seeing patterns. Hopefully you're seeing patterns. I'm not going to show you any shortcuts or anything right now, but hopefully you're starting to see the potential for shortcuts. But I'm not going to show any shortcuts yet because I want to make sure we understand the concepts here to make life easier and so you understand the big picture, okay? All right. All right, I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Again, if you have any questions, come jump on this afternoon and we'll talk to you later. Bye.